Today, we're talking to Bloqwork founder Michael J. Lawrence and Prakash Senghani, head of digital delivery at JLL, for a discussion on blockchain in construction. So thanks a lot for joining us today, Michael and Prakash. I thought we would start with just introductions, what you both do and how you both got into being interested in blockchain and starting Bloqwork.
Okay. Yes, I'm the founder of a project management company in Dubai called Insight. And through my day job working with Insight on project management, I've been in the construction industry now for probably more years than I would care to admit. And I've always had an interest in technology. And through a conference that I went to, I learned about blockchain technology and the application, and particularly with smart contracts, and especially in a legal context. And I saw the opportunity to apply that in construction. So I've started up Bloqwork as a company to look at the application, or to apply that technology to the construction sector. Initially, perhaps through looking at the administration of construction contracts, and then eventually leading on to payments and making payments through the blockchain. So that, in a nutshell, was my sort of journey into the blockchain technology and looking at the application of it in construction.
Thanks. Yeah, we'll go through some of those those challenges and opportunities in the industry in a little bit. Prakash, what about you? I love the background you have with the inventor's telescope, and apparently did a 3D printer back there and everything. So you're someone who's clearly into technology and using new systems.
Yeah, so I spent my entire career in the construction industry and solely, almost entirely focused on how to deliver digital technologies to help improve things in the construction industry. I think there's some well-known issues, and all of this sort of technology is now becoming more and more popular. And I think there's an acceptance that in order for us to face some of the challenges or overcome some of the challenges, the solutions are going to be digital and technological. As you can see, I've got personal interest in practically utilizing technology, so I try not to just talk the talk, but walk the walk. And with blockchain in particular, I guess I got into or more interested in how blockchain can be utilized in construction. When the first sort of crypto craze happened, where everybody was putting money into crypto, and it sort of became popular in the public consciousness. And I saw that underlying technology of blockchain could have implications in what we do in construction, particularly, again, in trying to help solve some of the issues that we have. I think those are some of what we're going to talk about today.
Yeah, and thanks for that. It's great to have an industry focus as well, because, we often talk about blockchain. I talk about blockchain in work and outside of work, and a kind of general focus as to how it will shift the economy. But I think having an industry focus on construction is really useful for us. Firstly, because construction is so critical to the UAE economy, but secondly, because it helps us draw out kind of some of the challenges and opportunities that can apply to blockchain in individual sectors. So there might be applications in the construction industry in blockchain that are particularly useful. There also might be some applications that are useful in other, for example, purely digital or virtual industries that aren't so useful in an industry where a lot of what you do happens in the real world and involves building physical buildings. So I thought, we'd start by just having a very, very quick introduction to what you both think the blockchain is and why it's important, and then we'll dive into some of kind of the details and the opportunities and challenges.
Well, I think the there are several advantages about blockchain technology. Whenever somebody asks me to explain what blockchain is, particularly in construction, I mean, one of the things you have to realize is the construction sector is very, very conservative. And you mentioned blockchain technology, and immediately they say, "Oh, I don't want to start paying my suppliers in Bitcoin." But what's Bitcoin got to do with me building, building stuff? And so you have to kind of roll back, and in many instances, actually, you are avoiding talking about blockchain. You're trying to just describe the advantages of your particular platform without mentioning it, because and making a conscious effort to avoid it. But when you are sort of put on the spot and asked to explain it, I tried to downplay a little bit some of the tech talk and say,
Sure.
think of your Excel spreadsheets, and think of a
Yeah.
situation where you have data on an Excel spreadsheet, and you are somebody holding that data on an Excel spreadsheet, and everybody has to go to that person for the information. All the information is always held on that database. Now, whoever holds that database, A, pays for it, and B, has the control over it. Now, when you think about construction and you think about the vast amount of value and the amounts of disputes you get in construction, and you talk about the existing situations where you have cloud technology, where effectively all the information is held in one place and is controlled by a provider, and you say, you talk to them and you say, you have multi-million, possibly billion-dollar disputes. And at the end of the day, you've got to get all of that data if you are in dispute. You've got to agree all of that data with everybody who's in dispute, and somebody is holding that data. Now, if you are in a situation where you've got a lot of money at play, do you trust the person who's holding that data? Do you trust the person who's paid for that data to be stored in a database somewhere? And this is something that is an issue, one of the issues that blockchain can solve. And you say, with blockchain technology, you hold the data on your spreadsheet or in your data center, and so does every other participant in the project. Everybody, through the technology, that data is duplicated throughout everybody's data, their own individual servers or data, and there's no dispute, because the technology actually is in agreement and synchronizes so that everybody's got that same set of information.
Great, and it does seem that there's a distinction that needs to be drawn between, distributed ledger technologies and decentralized technologies and cryptocurrencies. Prakash, yes. Is that something that you've also had to kind of emphasize when you've been talking about this?
100%. I think, look, cryptocurrency and blockchain became synonymous, and the distinction between the two of them is often difficult to describe to people and get across. Like Michael mentioned, as soon as you talk about blockchain, everyone's mind turns to Bitcoin or Ethereum or one of the cryptocurrencies, and particularly the finance elements or the finance use cases of the blockchain. But I think the big thing about blockchain is, or the easiest way to describe it, and I think Michael touched on it, is there's two things. It's about trust and it's about decentralization. And both of those things allow you to be more efficient in transferring and reading data. And I think that's where the biggest advantages are. I think some of the biggest problems we've got in the industry, particularly here in the UAE, is that there's a lack of trust in the supply chain. It starts right from the client and developers and percolates all the way down the supply chain. And there's this lack of trust causes some of the issues and some of the friction that Michael was talking about. And I think there is a space where blockchain can help us tackle that issue.
That's really interesting. And I think, one of the good things about this call is I think a lot of the audience at the Future Blockchain Summit are aware of what blockchain is, and some of these kind of more technical discussions aren't foreign to them. But I think the individual use cases of construction and some of the challenges and opportunities like the one you just described will be very interesting to people in the audience, and might be mirrored indeed in other industries. So just to introduce why we're talking about this subject, a 2015 World Economic Forum survey of 800 executives and experts found that 58% of respondents believe that a tenth of global GDP will be stored on the blockchain by 2025. In October 2017, the Dubai Land Department launched a blockchain-powered database to record all real estate contracts and link them together with a local utility provider, telecommunication system, and other property-related bills. So the blockchain is something that is globally arriving and is already contributing to GDP. And it's something that is also being looked at very closely and beginning to be rolled out by the government here. With that in mind, there have also been some papers, and I've read one recently, Rick's Blockchain Insights paper, February 2020, that have discussed some of these new possibilities with regard to the construction industry and argued that, yes, there are some key applications, supply chain, but also there are some challenges. So, for example, freight tracking and logistics in the construction industry are expected to be commercialized in the near future, while the automation of many functions of real estate agency and property data management might be 50 to 20 years away. So there's this argument that blockchain could have a large impact on real estate services that are delivered, but unlike in other industries like cryptocurrency, banking, or finance, there also might be elements of real estate transaction, construction, or the built environment where blockchain isn't quite ready to be used on physical assets. So we're jumping into the deep dive there, but what do you both feel about that that argument in summation? Does it ring true, or do you think it's a bit negative?
It is a bit negative, but you do have to appreciate that there are challenges. One of the challenges is the conservative outlook of the industry and the lack of money which is spent on research and development, and when you move from a construction project, I mean, you have to sort of take a step back and say, look at why this happens. But when you move from one project to another, everything changes. You've got a new design. We've got a completely new team, new client, and everything changes in a project type of environment. So the response to that is that people try to keep as much the same as they can. So they try to work with the same team. They try to use the same software they've always done. They try to resist change where possible, because everything else on the project has changed, and you're fighting against that. But despite that, we live in the real world. And when I look at construction, when I started in the industry, there were no mobile phones, there were no laptops. And of course, all of these things are ubiquitous now, and we're all using apps on our phone, and we're applying the technology that exists, because despite the conservatism of the industry, it's not to the extent of, we're not going to adapt laptops on our sites because everyone else is. The industry will move with the times, and blockchain technology, as you've mentioned, is something that's going to permeate all industries in general, and it will, its use cases will come into construction. When I talk, for example, I speak to contractors, and and I talk about the potential for automated payments through the blockchain, the potential for either a project bank account to be held, which is then controlled through smart contracts and money released to contractors and subcontractors and suppliers, or through smart contracts, somebody at the top of the chain is paid, and then the money filters down through the supply chain. The contractor's reaction is to say, I don't want to be paying anybody automatically. I don't want a situation where as soon as I'm paid, I'm automatically paying people, because they're making money through cash flow and through controlling cash flow and holding money. But when I'm saying to them, but this technology is coming with or without Bloqwork, this is the future, and this will be happening in other industries, and it will permeate into construction as well. And you've got to get your head around that. I mean, that's one argument. And the second thing we are doing in our particular startup is we're focusing on the banks, perhaps, because the banks are the ones who have an interest in making sure that everybody throughout the supply chain gets paid, because they don't want projects coming to a halt through gridlock because people down the supply chain haven't been paid, even though they've lent money to somebody and he's actually paid his main contractor, and the projects come to a halt because of people lower down the supply chain. So clients and banks have an interest in that. So there is a bit of resistance, and I think that will be addressed partly through, us keeping driving forward and pushing it in the industry, but it will also be just an effect from the greater use of blockchain technology in other industries and the technology permeating in general, in industry in general.
It seems you've picked up on two kind of themes there. The first is kind of efficiency. So I suppose if Dubai is a global city, and of course I don't have that much background in the construction industry, but I can imagine and I'm aware on some of these big projects like the Expo, for example, you have materials coming in from literally all over the world, and tracking that and paying for that presumably is a massive logistical challenge on some of these bigger projects, but also on relatively smaller projects, such as a high-rise tower. And then that second thing with the bank, I do think that sounds about efficiency, but it also sounds about trust. The point Prakash made earlier that, if there's more trust in the system, the industry as a whole could be more sustainable and could be easier to fund and perhaps even take more risks in. So it does sound like, are those two accurate business cases for blockchain that Bloqwork is focusing on here in the UAE?
Yeah, I mean, we are focusing on eventually looking at the payment application, but you've touched on, there are other issues related to construction, which again come back to trust and come back to the data. One is disputes, which I've mentioned, is that because of the problem, there's a lot of disputes in the industry. Another thing which construction, as all industries, cannot turn its back on is sustainability and tracking carbon footprint. And you imagine all of these components coming together in a construction project, each of which has to have a defined carbon footprint, and so that you know how much carbon's gone into the building, and you can then track that. And then the other element, which I think Prakash can talk more about, is the safety element, because it's an industry which is inherently very dangerous, and tracking people, KPIs and safety, and that element of it again is a key thing, which a key feature of the industry.
Yeah, so that point on safety, that's important. Let's try and get to that one later, though. Prakash, do you have anything to add to that? And I also want to ask you, go into a bit more depth on this supply chain question. So got here, blockchain enabled Walmart to shorten the time it takes to track and produce from 6 days to 2 seconds, according to the report I referenced earlier. There's also a Canadian-based technology company called IntelliWave that's been applying blockchain technology to construction. And the use case here seems to be developing Internet of Things sensors and cloud-based repositories around the site to maintain stock records for operatives to locate items. But the system also works on procurement and distribution. Now, I guess, how do these systems, these new systems on the blockchain, compare to the systems you already have? Because presumably the systems you already have do work. It's just that they're not decentralized, they're hosted in different ways, and they're structured in different ways.
Yeah, so I think just going back to the previous point you made, I think the report was saying that supply chain tracking is a use case that's going to mature first, and then the transactions on the blockchain is going to come later. I think the fact that the stat that you mentioned before, that the DLD, the Dubai Land Department's already putting real estate transactions onto the blockchain. So, for example, I'm in the process of buying a house right now. My title deed will be on the blockchain in Dubai. So that's already happening. So I kind of disagree with that statement. I think that probably the two of those things are going to happen together. And then now talking about the supply chain element. Yeah, look, what happens currently at the moment is that we're reliant on tracking based upon the sort of hauliers and the transportation companies giving us that data and that information, and they are reliant on whatever they're using for their tracking. And sometimes it's no more sophisticated than paper-based tags, paper-based forms that tell you that now this has been checked in. Someone scans it onto a system so that then you can see that this has arrived at this port, or this has just left this next waypoint. The issue with that is that it's open to fraud, right? Pieces of paper can be fabricated and or put in after the fact, or they get lost, and so that information, you get information gaps. And so what we're now seeing is adjacent technologies being applied. And you mentioned the Internet of Things. So sensors, cameras, and all of these things are now being connected together. And as that data is coming through, some of that data is being put onto the blockchain for the advantages that we mentioned before, making sure that it's trustworthy and we can trust where it came from, and make it accessible to everybody so that it's available, so that there's openness within the system, so everyone can see where things are at certain times. And I think that is starting to have an impact, and we're starting to see that. But the issue that we're going to have within the construction industry is that a building takes millions of elements to put together, and I don't think we're ever going to get into a place, or that we want to get into a place, where we're tracking every single widget. Tracking an individual screw, for example. I think the effort required in doing that is way more than the benefits that you get from tracking it. So I think it's going to be a case of picking the right things to track, and so there'll be certain high value, high impact, high risk elements that you'd want to track and understand where they are within the supply chain, where they are once they've arrived onto your site, and the technologies that you mentioned, incorporating those onto a blockchain, so that everyone can trust the data. I think that's a use case that's going to become more prevalent, and it's something that's already started. You mentioned some of the companies working on this already.
Yeah, and in addition to the Dubai Land Department, I know Dubai Ports has done a lot of background in blockchain and in the same kind of IoT use case that you just raised. But I thought we'd go into kind of more nuanced some of the challenges with these systems as well. So I was looking at building information, which is obviously a critical data point. And it says, building information modeling, creation of 2D or 3D digital models, can be traced with greater reliability, granularity, and is much harder to change or alter if it's stored on the blockchain. At the same time, the blockchain is very difficult for storing an entire BIM database, just because these databases are so large. So we do also have some limitations in terms of size and capacity with these new blockchain structures, right?
Yeah, and so I think lots of people are trying to apply blockchain to BIM, building information modeling, and I personally I'm not convinced that the use case currently exists for it, because I think it's basically a solution looking for a problem in this particular space. I don't currently see an issue with people mistrusting where the BIM information is coming from, because of the way that projects are set up. It's quite clear who's in charge of the model at any one time, who's in charge of the design information at any one time, and you don't typically get more than a handful of stakeholders inputting to the model at any one stage, or any one design stage. And so in this particular case, although yes, it is data driven, it has the challenges that you said. We produce models that are staggering in terms of their size. I've worked on models that have gone into the terabytes, and storing terabytes of information on the blockchain, it starts to slow it down and diminishes some of the benefits, the efficiencies that you get in passing information and exchanging information. And in some of the cases, you need to get access to the information very, very quickly. So yeah, from a building information modeling perspective, I'm yet to see a valid use case for utilizing the blockchain for that. I don't know if Michael's got a different opinion.
I mean, I think that's something that across industry, people are struggling with when it comes to distributed ledger technologies. People who work in gaming or any industry with very large data sets that they want to host on a decentralized network. It's a struggle. Michael, what do you think about that? And I also wanted to ask you about material passports, because these are data sets that are smaller, that accompany materials, components, products, detail the origin, kind of birth certificate from any of the components you use on a site. And you've talked about, how blockchain can help administratively. And of course, we've also mentioned the fraud issue, but at the same time, if you want to amend or change a mistake that's been made on the ledger, that's quite hard on the blockchain. So how is Bloqwork approaching those kind of challenges, where a legitimate mistake has been made, but it's just been inputted onto the blockchain incorrectly. And so, a material passport might be correct, or a key component might be listed incorrectly.
Yeah. Well, this is really no different. I mean, at the moment, you have many cloud-based technologies which are sometimes used in management of projects through a central database, and quite often the solution to an error being made through the input of data is to simply state that fact that that this data was an error, and to input again the correct data. And I don't think that is a bad thing. I think it's better for the system to record that data's been entered erroneously, and that this is a new set. And with construction, this is you're working with drawings and so on, which are many times are superseded. And the issue always is working with the latest set of data and the latest drawing. But you always need to keep on your system the previous revision, so that you can track what has happened on a drawing, and where perhaps mistakes have been made in the past, a drawing's been revised accordingly, because errors which happen may have a consequence. They may have a physical consequence on site, and somebody may have acted upon that error, and so you do need to be able to record these things, and keep a track of everything, and it's much more important to keep it transparent even when errors have been made, rather than have a situation where you can delete information and put something over the top and in fact effectively hide an error. So yeah, you mentioned the use case about tracking materials, and and tracking the origin of materials, and this becomes very important with things, for example, very often in construction. A fire door, for example, is certified as being, providing, say, 2 hours resistance to a fire. But it's not just the fire door itself, it's actually, the frame surrounding it, it's the ironmongery that goes with it, it's the workmanship. So a single component may be certified, but it may actually require that all the individual components that go into it and the workmanship is individually certified. So blockchain technology and tracking these individual points becomes very important.
Yeah, thanks for that. So 2 points on that, just quickly, because that's kind of fascinating. It's interesting because we actually have kind of one of the same challenges in publishing, in that there's a lot of publishers that are looking to host decentralized websites, where they can't be deplatformed, and they can host lots of content. And of course, one of the hilarious questions, the first questions an editor will ask is, well, how do I edit my article once it's posted on the blockchain? Because, often articles are edited 20 or 30 times, So it's quite a hilarious kind of case study from the publishing industry, where editors really don't like, having all their edits show up on the blockchain. And I completely agree with you, in terms of a building site, I can definitely understand all sorts of implications of and how it would be positive to kind of have a statement of something that's gone wrong, or where something has been added incorrectly. But you did also stress payments for Bloqwork, and I'm sure that's something that a lot of your vendors will be looking at. And if we're talking about the automation of payments and smart contracts, what happens when a mistake is made? Is that something that's easy to solve? I'm sure that's something a lot of vendors would ask about, given the huge volume of materials that are dealt with on some of these sites.
Yeah. I mean, the challenge of smart contracts in general is of course that it's a bit of a misnomer. They're not really contracts, and they're not very smart. They're really just an automated set of instructions, a workflow, And people in construction, we're working with workflows at the moment for processes already, albeit on cloud-based systems. But when you're absolutely right that when it becomes then linked to payments, it is more critical to get it right and test it. But I think you can't not apply the system due to that risk when you look at the inherent, the overall benefits to the whole system and the transparency. You just have to accept the fact that there's got to be a lot of testing going on. There's got to be ways to reverse out payments, albeit visible, transparent. If something has been paid in error. And of course, that's no different to the current system where occasionally people do make payments to the wrong people. But one of the things you are also getting is that you're avoiding fraudulent situations. I've seen payments actually disappear through fraud somewhere along the line, where somebody sent along all their IBAN and their details, and people now are actually going back, believe it or not, to the fax machine to send through bank details, or sending bank details, half of it on the fax and half of it on WhatsApp, because if it's going through email, they're afraid, and it's happened where the IBAN numbers and the details have been taken somehow from the net, and the money's been paid, but it's not actually reached the person it's supposed to have gone to. So these fraudulent situations are happening, and I think you have to look at the way the blockchain payment system is inherently more secure than a normal payment system. And yes, there may be instances where somebody makes a payment in error, but then you are also avoiding these situations of money, frankly, being stolen.
Yeah, we'll circle back to that point because that's an interesting one. Just want to dip into, because it's a good segue to talking about kind of the real estate market quickly. And I know, Prakash, you were mentioning that if you buy a house in Dubai, it will be stored on the blockchain now. There's this push to digitalize, real estate investments through the use of tokens as digital assets. Apart from property investments, network participants are able to use tokens built on smart contracts for consumer services and smart leasing. I know in the States, I don't think we have this in the UK, I could be wrong, but there's a mass that certain sales agents are only allowed to represent certain properties. And the Dubai Land Department is likely to know who's listing what. So there's this idea of listings on the blockchain just resolves duplication and that kind of thing. Now, do you see that happening here in Dubai, this idea of tokens and new structures for actually buying real estate, possibly even new investment vehicles that are erected and regulated through the blockchain in future, both actually on the real estate end and also possibly on the mega project end? Is that something that's likely to happen anytime sooner, or is it still a little bit way off?
I think so. I think that we are going to see tokenization, and I think the application that Michael talked about in terms of helping the cash flow on a project and making sure that the funds actually percolate down into the supply chain. One effective way of doing that is to tokenize a project, essentially, right? So imagine you get a real estate loan from a bank to be able to deliver a project. You turn those into tokens, and then through smart contracts, you get paid in tokens, and then at the other end, that the very last sort of the bottom of the supply chain can go back to the banks to turn that into fiat currency, into currency that you can buy stuff with. So I think the tokenization is the strongest use case, and probably the one that's going to have the biggest impact in what we do, and not just during the construction phase, as you mentioned, or alluded to, is utilizing tokens then to buy and to lease and to carry out services, right? So you can imagine in terms of maintenance, if you've got a token that's for a certain building, you could use that token to carry out, I don't know, your air conditioning maintenance or your plumbing or something like that. And having that record again on the blockchain, you can see a history of it, how many times things went wrong, how much it cost the last time, etc. And all of these things are much more transparent, and helps you to understand the cost of these things. So I think, yes, definitely tokenization is something that's going to come moving forward. And I think tokenization will also help with different ways of investing in property. So there's a startup, I forget the name, but there's a startup here in Dubai that's allowing people to buy small chunks of building, right? So instead of, obviously, a normal retail investor wouldn't be able to buy a block of flats, for example, or a block of apartments, but they might want to still get into that asset class because they know from history that it's got good returns. And so this allows you to buy a small part of that building and almost crowdsourcing it, and then benefit from either the rental that comes from it, or from the sale of it, the capital appreciation later. And being able to break that asset down into chunks and then sell those tokens to people, I think that's going to be a new decentralized finance play that is going to come into the real estate industry, and that's going to be something that's powered by blockchain, I believe.
Well, that's really interesting. I mean, the tokenomics of construction and real estate in Dubai, that could be a discussion for another time. But yeah, that's a really interesting point that I think a lot of people would kind of understand just on a basic consumer level. Yeah. So Michael referenced payments again earlier, and I thought we'd just shift towards the end of our conversation towards that dreaded word, cryptocurrency, and just talk a little bit about it, because it is discussed a lot here in the UAE, and there could possibly be some applications. So there are people in Dubai who have bought properties using cryptocurrencies in some shape or form, in very good neighborhoods of Dubai. And I've met a couple of them, and possibly people working in the construction industry have met them. So it isn't as abstract as it seems, when you first bring it up. But there are also issues with this. I mean, we've been talking about trust and decentralization and avoiding fraud, and since 2017, hackers have stolen nearly 2 billion worth of cryptocurrency through vulnerabilities and various hacks. And there's also this argument that a couple of construction papers that I've read made that cryptocurrencies are unlikely to be used to make property or construction project payments in the near future. Now, that might be the case in the UK or the US. Is the Dubai market slightly different here, or am I just, hanging out with too many crypto geeks and that kind of thing? What's actually happening here? Is it slightly different to the UK and the US?
Yeah, I think it's a very forward-looking leadership and economy, and they are looking to make the whole future technologies a key component of the development of the area here. So I think you will find that there are a lot of innovative approaches, and it would not be unsurprising to find more innovative uses of cryptocurrencies and so on. Of course, one of the things which construction will struggle with, as most industries, is the fact that the cryptocurrency needs to be tied to a fiat currency, and it needs to be you can't rely on if it's going to be used as a transaction. You're looking more like, as Prakash says, more like a token type of arrangement, and fixed exchange rates, and the exchange back to the fiat currency is critical. And this is where you have to struggle to explain, because people think of course these things have already been developed and they are already in use in other industries, and it's not unique to construction, this particular problem. But when you talk to people in construction, they think about the ups and downs of Bitcoin and receiving Bitcoin from their employer, and then it dropping 30-40% overnight, and they've got to pay their suppliers. And that's the kind of mentality, that's what people have in their mind if they're not in this industry. And so of course that problem has been resolved in many other types of transactions, but you have to not only look at cryptocurrency and say, you then have to make the distinction between, cryptocurrency as an investment and cryptocurrency as a fintech use case for buying and selling.
Yeah, and okay, so to kind of round that off and close off the conversation today, I wanted to circle back to kind of two questions. The first is, possibly should have brought it up earlier, but what do you both think about this division between private and public blockchains? Because I think both of you remarked on or alluded to the importance of interoperability between different construction partners and different construction industries. Michael, you talked about how it becomes exhausting to constantly change your KPIs and processes for every new project. And there is this discussion on this idea of a public blockchain where everyone can see everything, as well as kind of private corporate-based blockchains. And I think that might be an important one for the audience to understand. And then I guess the question to the floor I wanted to put was, how is all of this shaping globalization? Because, we're based here in Dubai, we have the Expo, we have GITEX coming up in a week and a half. And we have these construction projects that do involve, companies and vendors and suppliers from all over the world. And if blockchain does add to efficiency, if it does add to cutting down on fraud, to observing all of these things, if it basically provides scale and speed to a building project, do you think this is something that will also have a macroeconomic effect on Dubai as it, pushes itself into the fourth industrial revolution, tries to compete with economies that are often much larger, and presumably builds out projects, as quickly, if not more quickly, than other competing economies? So those are two slightly, difficult questions just to end up the conversation today. And I wonder what you both think on both those points.
So in terms of private versus public, I think most of the use cases we've talked about inherently require a private cloud, a private blockchain, just because of so if we're going to tokenize something for a particular project, that inherently requires a private blockchain. And then you do get into the issues that you mentioned about interoperability between projects, or suppliers having to then have access to multiple blockchains to be able to transact and carry out work. So I think there are issues to be resolved there, but there are certain blockchains that allow you to have interoperability between private blockchains. So there's one I think that IBM worked on that allows
Hyperledger, right?
Hyperledger, yeah, that allows you to create a private blockchain, but then also because the foundational code is the same, you can potentially have controlled interactions with other blockchains and transfer information from one blockchain to another. So I think there are solutions to that. I think the public blockchain, like things like blockchain that Bitcoin are currently founded on, have security issues, and so most of the cryptocurrencies that have been stolen because of vulnerabilities on the public blockchain. And so having a private blockchain kind of removes some of that thing, and going forward might actually add other risks, but it removes some of the current risks, I think. And then onto your second question about globalization, I think, and that links to the previous question before that as well, about the sort of having the cryptocurrency. What we're seeing now is most of the advanced nations' central banks are exploring what they call gov coins. So these are cryptocurrencies that are being minted by the central banks themselves, and so inherently they'll be linked to a fiat currency. So the UK government's doing it, the UAE government's doing it, the Chinese government's actually already rolled it out and piloting it in some of the cities there. And essentially what that is a digital version of the country's currency. And you can imagine then that you'll be able to then transact with that that currency on projects to be able to pay for things in the same way at the moment that you do with cash, just much more efficiently. And once those central banks work out how they can talk to each other, you'll be able to then, like we do at the moment, but much more efficiently, carry out transactions in other currencies just in a purely digital form. So I think that's where the industry is heading. Is actually the opposite of why things like Bitcoin and that were started, to try and get away from a centralized source of finance. But I think the governments are now seeing that there are benefits to this, and if they are going to regulate and get control of the cryptocurrency and the decentralized finance industry, they're probably going to have to be part of it. And we are starting to see huge sort of movements in the GovCoin sort of industry.
Thanks for that answer. Yeah, there was a couple very big articles that came out the past few weeks that argued exactly what you said about the Gov coins. And Michael, what do you think on those points?
Well, on the first point, I agree with Prakash. At the moment, we are looking at an enterprise private blockchain use cases for construction projects. One of the issues that you always come up against when you're talking to construction people is the concern about their data and their project information. You imagine, when you're talking about automated payments, for example, and the contractor is saying, well, I don't want a situation where my employer can see how much I'm paying my subcontractors, because I'm paying my subcontractors and then I'm adding a margin, and then I'm paid by my employer. And obviously he's worried about maintaining commercially confidential information about his pricing and not exposing that. And you have to make the point that you can get around these problems in terms of you have to allow a certain amount of transparency in terms of how payments are made, but the difficulty is you have to maintain commercially confidential information.
Yeah.
And this is a concern, but at the same time, we're all familiar with sending emails backwards and forwards, and we don't necessarily expect that when we send an email that anybody other than the person we send it to can read it. So electronic transactions are happening all the time, and transactions on the blockchain, you can put these barriers in place to maintain confidentiality where it's required, or make it transparent where it's required. And that's no different to any other communication which is made electronically at the moment. And that's one of the points that you find yourself explaining, because they don't want everything transparent on the blockchain, and they don't want everything read by everybody. And of course, that would not be the case. You have to put those things in place. I think as we're moving forward now, one of the things which is kind of the holy grail that everybody's looking at in blockchain technology is the interoperability of blockchains. And there are various competing projects which I find quite interesting, looking at all of the different projects which are in place to make interoperability of blockchains a normal thing, so that you can operate on an enterprise blockchain, for example, but yet still exchange information with a Bitcoin one if you wanted to do that, and or Ethereum. And and they're not there yet, but I think I'm not quite sure who's going to win the race, but I think it's going to be a matter of a short number of years before the debate about enterprise and public blockchains is going to not be so critical, because in fact you're going to be able to exchange information between one blockchain and another, and a public one and a private one and a private one and another private one through one of these systems which are currently under development.
Well, Well, thanks for that, Michael. And Michael and Prakash, thanks so much for that industry focus today. It was great talking with you, and we'll see you at the Future Blockchain Summit starting on the 17th of October.